on our monitors. But while we're singing tonight, I usually harmonize and I sing a bass and I don't have a solo voice, but we as a family have sung together a few times. And so I harmonize. I just looking at the words up there and realize while I'm harmonizing that one thing you miss when you don't sing out of the songbook is you don't see those notes and you don't learn music as well. And so don't be afraid to get that songbook out, okay? I know we started this because just because of the COVID, don't want to get the songbook. And not trying to make an issue out of it, obviously. But you do miss that. So I like the best of both worlds. I like to look on the screen and hold my songbook and look and to do both. So keep that in mind if you would. Well, as you notice, we have a stranger on the platform. Yeah, and I'm being a little silly with that, but I love Alex and appreciate him. And I'd asked Alex to preach last Sunday, and this is before we got all this news with Ruth Ann. So if some of you are thinking, wow, this really is tough on preacher, he had to ask somebody else to preach, and that's not the case. If I'd asked Alex to preach before we'd gotten the news, and not only that, I mean, he's still family. So, if that was the reason to have him preach, then I would feel more comfortable going ahead and preaching myself. But I just got to thinking he was on my heart. And when some found out that I asked Alex to preach, he got excited about it. And I asked him on Sunday morning, and he started letting his family know, preacher asked me to preach on Thursday night. He's excited about it. I think that's the way it should be. And y'all have heard me say before, a question was asked to Brother Hiles. Brother Hiles, I enjoy preaching, and in Preacher Boys class. And Brother Hiles said, good. If you don't enjoy preaching and your own preaching, what makes you think anybody else would enjoy your preaching? So I'm glad he's excited to preach, and I'm looking forward to it. And from time to time, I just got to thinking I probably ought to just do that. So Alex is the first one, and for me to ask to preach while I am here, that's more pressure than when the preacher is gone. And so I love Alex, appreciate him, love his family. So just on my heart to do it. And I'm glad I get to be here to hear him and experience it with all of you all. So Alex, come preach to us. I love you.
All right, we are going to be out of 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Growing up, and since then I've been to plenty of camps, conferences, revival meetings, whatnot. And you always have the guest speakers and everything, and usually they're friends with each other. And they'll get up and they'll say all kinds of nice things about each other before that preacher gets up. I always thought it would be hilarious if that guy got up and said, that guy couldn't be here tonight, you're stuck with me. So that's kind of how this one is right here. Pastor warned me Sunday morning that he would be here and that the pressure would be on. Like, well, I've already done that, working there in Terre Haute with the church and the ministry there in the school. I've preached a couple times in church, and I was going to cover a Sunday night one time. The pastor, I think, was on vacation about a week and a half, and I'm all geared up for it. And then I think he called me, and for whatever reason, he was coming back into town early, and he was going to be in the crowd that night. So I've had to do that before. And, man, I just figured, you know what, if this is all the other guys get to go through with it, the other staff guys, pastor wasn't there, and not so much pressure. So I thought, well, I'm just going to throw them under the bus then. And I got up that night, and before I started my sermon, I was like, man, we have had some good preaching while pastor has been gone. I've enjoyed these other men covering the pulpit. Brother Eric, I've never seen anybody use puppets in a sermon before, but that was amazing. Brother Avery, I don't know what version of the Bible that was, but God got a hold of my heart with that, So I just figured I'd throw him under the bus with it. You got to have fun with it, and that's the best way. If you can't laugh at yourself, that's one of the best ways to overcome that pressure. On a more serious note, honestly, there are two pulpits that it is my dream to preach in, and this is one of them. Ever since the Lord really got a hold of my heart that year after high school, it's been part of my goals, if you will. Yeah, I think throughout high school I was a good kid, but I'm not real sure I was a spiritual kid, and there's a difference. I wasn't out running around doing all the things I shouldn't, but it was not really within my heart to follow God's plan for my life. Well, I figured, no, I'll stay in church, but anything beyond that, I'm not too sure about this God. And man, He really brought me to the point of seeing the reality of my present at the time and what my future was going to be. He showed me the reality that life without His plan was not going to hold any peace for me. You know, things didn't really turn out the way I thought they would, but I have found that sticking to what God wanted for me, I am so much more happy with what God had planned than what I thought I had planned. And even a couple years down the road, I look back at what I thought were some of my goals as a teenager, what I thought my career was going to be, and man, I am glad I did not go down that path. I have been happy about that. I'm honestly more of a quiet person, if you've noticed that, because my opinions and my emotions are really strong. So strong, I don't want to overwhelm anybody, so I try and keep that to myself. And look, hard day work, I know how that is. You know, sitting here tired and everything, man, that preacher, he either better be bombastic or short, or okay, both is better, you know. So I understand that. I'm going to do my best to regulate my time. I haven't always been so good about that. It's kind of like when I go bowling, I'm all gutters or over 100. There's not really in between. So it's always more like, 15, 20 minutes or hour and 10 minutes. So I'm going to do my best to regulate myself. I even brought out just kind of a timer I could keep an eye on during this, all right? And I won't tell you how long it is, but it is in the triple digits, all right? But anyway, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1 there. And as Paul writing here, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, "Now I, Paul, myself beseech you by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am base among you, but being absent am bold towards you. But I beseech you, that I may not be bold when I am present with that confidence, wherewith I think to be bold against some, which think of us as if we walked according to the flesh. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ." I want to use verses 4 and 5 there as my text for the night, especially that pulling down of strongholds, that casting down imaginations, that every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God. Now, as a young preacher, I'm kind of obligated to say at this point, now I know this is a familiar passage, and because we feel self-conscious about it, right? Like we didn't find something really special or like something that no one had ever preached out before. I need you all to turn to 1 Maccabees tonight, but anyway, Paul in this passage is bringing something to the Corinthians' attention and wishes to do so with meekness and gentleness in a humble and mild manner. He's following Christ's example with that. Christ was amazing at that. And it's easy to say that, well, of course, he's Christ. But when you really think about it, the example, man, I get so caught up on the example of manhood Christ put before us. I'm sorry, that's a rabbit trail there, but man, that has been such a driving thing as I get older in my life, dealing with masculinity and things like that and how it's attacked. But that's not what my sermon is about. I love talking about that. He wants to deal with this matter, Paul does, calmly, rationally, and hopes they will as well, and that they'll receive it that way. In person, he prefers to be this way, but he's not against fighting a battle as well, and he's shown that throughout Scripture. Paul reminds us, and we've been taught it over and over, that this Christian life is a battle. It's one that can't be fought with earthly weapons. It's one that can't and shouldn't be fought with carnal earthly attitudes. It's when we use those spiritual weapons like we see in Ephesians 6, and those spiritual attitudes like we see in Galatians 5 that we see victory. Or it talks about in 1 John 5:4, "For whatsoever is born of God overcometh the world, and this is the victory that overcometh the world, even our faith. Victory. I like the sound of that. That is what I look for in my daily life. Whatever job God is going to put me in, whatever I'm there at, I don't want to be bad at it. I don't want to be mediocre at it. I want to be good at it. All right? I want to excel at it. And if that means I have to work harder, then so be it. Anything worth having requires work. Don't convince yourself, young people, about that otherwise. You want a good relationship, you want a good marriage, you want to raise good kids, it's going to take work. You want to have a good Christian life, it's going to take work. That's a rabbit trail, but I just taught Christian school for about 5 years, taught Sunday schools for younger children and everything, and man, that cannot be reiterated enough. None of those good things are just given to anybody. These enemies we fight, like those strongholds, if you can picture that in your head. I'm good at picturing things in my head. I've got a pretty good imagination. I think of that stone tower there, almost like you'd see from a castle. Those are brought about by the devil and all his avenues of attack. The imagination and high things that we struggle with, like it's talking about in these verses, in our battle, are usually formed within our own mind, our own sinful nature. Pride, fear, doubt, worry, those are all things that the devil is going to nurture in us to make us useless, or even better for his agenda, just completely destroy us. We've got to tear down those imaginations. We've got to tear down those strongholds, those high things. When I was a kid, somewhere between the ages of 5 and 10, we went to the library a lot, and I always like to get these big cross-section books. You can see the insides of aircraft carriers and tanks and all this other stuff, and fighter jets. Oh, I love that stuff, seeing the mechanics of how it all worked. And I remember in one of them, it was weird in the tank one, I'm looking at that, I'm like, what's wrong with the driver, Dad? And they're like, oh, they cross-section the driver, that's his spleen. I'm like, okay, that's cool, all right. But one of them was just completely about castles, and it took a castle through a siege. And I'll explain that in a second. But the whole book was about that, the different steps there. That's really the title of my message, and I'll explain why deeper, why it plays into that. Lay siege. And don't worry, I'm going to explain those words, all right, for those of you not familiar, okay? I'm used to working with young kids, so that's all right. Lay siege, about a siege on a castle. And a siege is when a town, a fort, or castle, whatever, is surrounded by an enemy so that nothing gets in, nothing gets out. The goal of the enemy with a siege is to weaken, to starve that town till there's no resistance and they can just go in and take it over. The enemy will use siege weapons like catapults, ballistas, or battering rams. And I love seeing those in the books when I was younger. Since then, with different stuff, I've been able to build some catapults. A catapult, it was a contraption that would use elastic force, almost like a rubber band, to fling a missile. And they'd fling all kinds of, big rocks, flaming barrels, dead cows, whatever you want, all right? They figured, we could throw a dead cow in there and then spread disease through the town, COVID cows, I don't know. You can call it what you want, okay? And so I built a little one out of those, out of pencils and some rubber bands and some different stuff, a spoon and some other stuff, when I was a teacher there at the school. And in chapel, a lot of the times, we'd play a game, we'd do some more songs to get them settled down, and then we'd actually have the message. It is my job to run all that, so I was like, I'm a free rein on coming up with games, yeah! So I came up with some crazy ones. I built that little catapult, it wasn't real big, and a kid would sit there at a table, and he'd fling little army men with that catapult, and they'd fly up in the air. And then we'd have a boy versus a girl, and they're running around with buckets trying to catch the army men out of the air. And so that was one of the games we played there, and you'd keep track with that. A ballista, it looks like a giant crossbow, except it fires a big arrow. The arrow can go like 1,200 yards, go right through armor. It's pretty cool stuff. A battering ram, if you think about it, it's like a shed on wheels. There's a wooden log suspended in it. They'd get under that shed and everything so they were safe from any of the missiles of the defenders. They'd wheel up to the castle walls and then just start punching a hole in it. And so that's kind of what you're thinking of there with siege weapons, if you will. The Bible, I love this stuff growing up. And the Bible actually mentions siege weapons, that kind of stuff, 2 times in the Scripture. Give me a second. Over in 2 Chronicles 26, you don't have to turn there if you want to look it up later, 26:15. And he made in Jerusalem engines invented by cunning men to be on the towers and upon the bulwarks, to shoot arrows and great stones withal. In Ezekiel 26:9, it says, And he shall set engines of war against thy walls, and with his axes he shall break down thy towers. I love seeing when the Bible interacts with history, they intersect there. The Bible's not strictly speaking a history book, but there's so much history in it. If you understand what's kind of going on in the world during that time, it brings a lot of context to the Scripture. Like I was just reading a couple weeks back, Pontius Pilate, we've heard of that guy, right? Okay, you know, the trial of Christ, everything like that. And I was reading about him, and he lived in Roman society. He was kind of from the upper middle class, the equestrian class, and they could use up political favors, and they could get their oldest son assigned to the military for 6 months. He'd be in a staff position, he wouldn't really do anything. The rest of the military would do their best to ignore him, because they're not going to stick around, and after that, the kid would go into business, politics, whatever, and say, hey, I've got a war record, you know? Well, Pontius Pilate was one of the few guys that stuck with it. And he was so good at math and geometry, they put him in charge of all those siege weapons in his division. So he was actually really good with those ballistas like I'm talking about. They called their catapults onagers, not really important. I just thought that was really cool to see the background, and I'm thinking, man, how does he get from that strong military career to where he is when Christ comes on the scene? But I was just thinking about that anyway. We need to lay siege on the sins, habits, thoughts that are holding us back in our Christian life. So as quick as I can, I want to give you just 3 points, all right, because that's kind of the model, and hopefully exhort to you the necessity of this, all right? And all 3 of them start with S, the very first one, and might think it's a no-brainer, but salvation. It's the most important, but it's the most simple, and that's what's so wonderful about the gospel. It is so profound, but so easy to get that a man, woman, child, whoever, anybody can get a hold of that and have that in their heart. You know, you want to get yourself under the right king. The devil is called the prince of the power of the air. I was thinking about it. Man, with salvation, you got to get out from under the slavery and oppression of the prince and get under the grace and liberty of the king. You got to get yourself under the right guy. I've got my salvation settled, but it's just so good. I have to tell somebody about it. You know, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It's the only thing in my life that ever gave me hope. Why not? Why would I keep that to myself? Oh, man, I can still remember years ago, I had this one summer when I was working there in Terre Haute, that out on the bus routes and for revival meetings and different stuff, for whatever reason, God kept putting younger teenage boys in my path, and I was able to lead a lot of them to the Lord. And man, I remember going up to these kids' houses once. We were just out door knocking, and there was a group of boys out playing there, so my partner started talking to some. I started talking to someone. One of them was really getting it, but it came down to the end of that salvation plan, and he was worried about his friends, you know, being there. And I said, look, buddy, look, this is an important decision. If you need to, go in the backyard where you're by yourself. And he went back there for a couple minutes, and he came back, and there were tears in his eyes. That is such a powerful feeling, to be able to lead someone to the Lord. And look, I'm sorry if some of you haven't felt that. I'm sorry if some of you haven't gotten to see that, to experience that, but maybe it explains some things. Man, it is a great feeling. You know what? God has always been with me. I was thinking back the other day, I was, a little discouraged with politics. Who wasn't? And I was sitting there thinking, honestly, I've seen setbacks, but God has never left me destitute. He has always brought me through. I've experienced setbacks and trials, but God never left me alone. You know what? For this battle on sin, for this siege, I'm going to need that support. There is no victory without the King. The second point, see, we're rushing through. Actually, the first one's way shorter, but the second point, also starting with an S, is supply lines. If you're taking notes, if not, just kind of sit there. Yep, okay. So you're doing a great job at it. You guys are good. The side that wins in a siege is the one who can hold out the longest. The attacker or the defender, either one. If either side is no longer receiving support, it will lose. A city can't survive a siege without supplies, but the enemy can't keep the siege going without their own supplies. And I think it's Napoleon was famous for saying, basically, an army marches on its stomach. All right, if they're not getting fed, they're not going to do the job. And they got to keep those supply lines going. You know what? The devil is going to do everything he can to cut your supply lines. My mentality is to do it to him first. Hey, I like the idea of a preemptive strike, all right? Maybe that's a little bit 80s, but I like it, all right? You cut the devil's supply line. This is that separation that the pastor's always talking about. The devil is going to try and isolate and separate you from God or any other godly influence. It's crazy because he convinces you first everybody else is doing it. It's normal, whatever the sinful habit is. But then once he's got you, he turns it around on you. He says, you know, you're the only one in this wretched condition, right? You're all alone. And he flips that way. The Bible talks about the three ways the devil attacks us. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. And I've heard opinions that you kind of move through those throughout the series of your life, but especially as a man, I get older, and listening to older people with more wisdom, I don't think you so much move through them as they just add on. And at a certain point, you're dealing with all of them. Desire for sin doesn't really leave with age, you just have to learn to control it. I feel like I keep discovering more besetting sins. I'm sitting over here with God going, I've got another one? Oh my goodness. I don't think I'm supposed to have this many, God. There's something wrong with me, all right? And finding more and more things in my life I just have to exclude. That some things I know will take me down the wrong path. It always starts in your heart before you physically do it. You know, if thy right hand offend thee. I can't keep pet sins. They always end up biting you. You can't bring a sin into your life and expect it to stay in a cage. It doesn't work that way. I love to tell young people the devil has had thousands of years to refine his methods. He's the ultimate predator, the ultimate hunter. But honestly, he's using the same dumb trick. So much of it starts with that pride in the heart. You ever read Isaiah 14, how it talks about the devil went from being the angel in heaven to where he is now? I am, over and over and over again. It's like a teenage Instagram page or something. I don't know. I pick on the teens because they're an easy target, but we've seen enough adults do it if we're honest, but they're a little more sensitive, so, you know. Teens just like, that one hurt. Hey, it's good for you, you know. But as we get older, like, don't tell me what to do. You know, so I find myself doing that. I might be the only one in this room who's guilty of that. You guys are good people. I'm struggling over here, all right? The devil in the Garden of Eden, right back there at the beginning, you know, the devil fell from pride, and right there in the beginning, he's preying on Eve's pride. Comes up to her, look, I know God told you not to, all right? I know he tried to warn you about the consequences, but come on. You know you'll be the exception. You're not going to have the problem with this. God just doesn't want you to live life to its fullest. And that's how we got her. What is it, like 6,000 years later, and he's playing the same dumb trick. He comes up to us and says, look, I know your parents, your youth pastor, your pastor, whoever it is. I know they told you this. I know they tried to warn you about the consequences, but you know, you'll be the one to control it. You'll be the one that doesn't fall. They just don't want you to live life to the fullest, or whatever hip term he wants to use, all right? It's the same dumb trick because it keeps working. What is that? I can quit anytime I want. I've got it under control. Isn't that the battle cry of addicts everywhere? Every single one I've ever talked to. Sin doesn't negotiate. I'd have kids come up to me in class. Can we do this? I do not negotiate with terrorists. But, you know, so I loved having fun with the kids. What's it say in the scripture about Simon? Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. He wants you to break you apart. He wants to take everything worthwhile and leave the husk. That's all he wants. What tragedy do you have to go through before you're done playing with it? What will it take before you decide you've had enough? You know, they talk about victimless crime, but that doesn't actually exist. Victimless sin is the same thing. It doesn't actually exist. I can't go into the young people I've seen hurt from sin. I haven't even been at this long. I don't want any part of that. I don't want to bring that into my marriage. I don't want to bring that into my family. I don't want to bring that into my home. I've got people who care about me. I've got a family that relies on me. I cannot afford to fall for those tricks, but it starts small. I don't want it small. Every broken marriage started with something small. I don't want that. I don't want that for my kids. You know how many men I've looked up to and loved and respected and seen them fall, seen their families suffer? I don't want that. I'm not playing with that. You got to strengthen your supply lines. You got to cut the devil's and you got to strengthen yours. And when you strengthen yours, that's that sanctification. Devotions, prayer, church, being involved in your church. You got to be honest with yourself and you got to be honest with God. God, look, I need help with this. You already know I struggle with this. That's not news to you. I just need to admit it to you, and I need some help to get it under control. I need some protection in my life. We don't like honesty. We don't like truth because it hurts. That's the only way change comes about. I recently listened to a book. It had been originally a series of interviews with different people from the intelligence field, FBI, CIA, whatnot. And one guy had a quote that always stuck out to him that he has used throughout his life. Whenever you are not training, someone, somewhere is. And when the two of you meet, they will win. And the devil is always out there training and scheming and preparing. And if you are not doing the same when it comes along your path, that temptation, you will not win. The devil will win. He's better at this than you. My third point, you got to salt the earth. There were times in the Bible where the Lord gave Israel victory of a foe, and He warned them, you need to kill every single person involved. And almost every time in Israel's earthly wisdom, they said, no, we can control this, we can handle this. And they're still fighting those enemies today. That was thousands of years ago, and they're still dealing with the same thing. There are times throughout history where an enemy's homeland was conquered. To make sure they couldn't replant their fields, their farms, rebuild their economy, they would salt the fields. Fields with a high salt content, there's most crops, it can't grow. There's a couple out there, but not much. And sure, over generations and time, that nature will take its course and take its way, and you can be able to rebuild it again. But it was a symbol that this enemy will never rise to power again in this area. And we need to get control of this in our life. When we get control of it, we need to salt the fields. We need to decide there is no going back. We cannot leave the avenues of attack open for the devil. You know what? The devil is good enough at attacking us when we're in our Bible. We've got a prayer time with God every day. We're in church. We're doing everything we can. He still finds a way to attack us. Why am I going to give him more opportunities? He doesn't need them. I love reading history. In World War II, they had the city of Singapore, and they knew the Japanese were on their way. Well, Singapore on about 3 sides is surrounded by water, the bay there. And so they've got their fortified walls. They've got gun emplacements facing out across the water. They've got their anti-aircraft batteries ready for the fighters and bombers. There's marsh around the earth there, around that side. So you can't use tanks to attack them. You can't use mechanized infantry. They were set. They were golden. Craziest thing, one day out of the village, this whole stream of Japanese soldiers on bicycles that they've stolen come zipping into the open doors of town. And that's how they took over Singapore. They had a bicycle corps. This is the craziest thing. Yeah, I just read a book about Jack Riley. He was the driving force behind capturing the notorious drug leader, Lord El Chapo, both times. That's a long story. But he was really behind that. And he had a friend he used to go running with. and his friend had a nicotine addiction. So he's got 2 nicotine patches on. And they'd run along this tree-lined path. Except the guy with the nicotine patches had packs of cigarettes stashed in random trees along the way, just in case. The guy couldn't quit smoking. He couldn't figure out why. Those are ridiculous examples. But we think we've got victory over sin, and then we leave something open. We leave an avenue attack open. I would love to blame the devil, but in reality, when I look back, most of the time I opened myself up to it. I gave him the open door. Man, sitting in meetings at that school with students who have messed up, gotten themselves in trouble, 4 out of 5 times. Something they did on the internet, usually on their cell phone, every single time. And then what do I find out a week later? The parents gave them back their cell phone. Really? Really? We're trying... I thank God my parents made it hard to sin. I thank God we had one dumb computer, and that was about it. I got old enough, bought my own laptop, like, yeah, this is mine. I don't remember exactly how the discussion went, but it was something like Mama said, yeah, and that's going to stay in the living room or the dining room, and that's it. I can't take it to my room. I paid for that. Yeah, this is our house. And man, yeah, I had to work at getting into sin. It was terrible. But I thank God for that years later. They never once let me have a TV in my room. They made it hard. If I wanted to play a video game, it was in front of them. You know, I couldn't get away with anything. Hey, I've worked with young people long enough. A teen boy home alone with an internet connection is a bad combo. And I've worked with teens long enough. I don't think it's any better for the girls. Man, I had a youth pastor friend preach a message kind of on the dangers of that and everything, and he did a lot of research. Every time he preached a message, he just did all kinds of research. And I'm not talking like this Christian group says, no, like actual, qualified, certified, all that jazz professionals. And that's who he'd quote. And man, the world knows it, and we can't seem to figure it out. In 2019, a year ago, the BBFC, this group, did a research on the impact of porn in children. They did this survey, somewhere around 4,000 to 6,000 people, parents, teenagers, children. 75% of parents in the survey thought their child hadn't seen pornography online. But it turned out in reality, 53% of the children admitted that they had seen it. 58% of girls in the survey had seen it under the age of 18. Boys, it was 68%. They found that between the ages of 11 to 13, 51% were into it. When you went up to 14 to 15, the numbers jumped to 66%. There was another group, Bitdefender. They're an online research group, a security company. They, for whatever reason, did research into this. They reported that children under the age of 10 are now 22% of all the online porn consumption in the world. The children under 10 said that basically 1 in 10 were visiting one of the major porn video sites. Man, you harp on cell phones a lot. This is a different time. Yeah, I don't know how my generation lived without them. I don't know how your generation, I don't know. You're right, this is a different time. The devil got better at his job. I don't want to come across as angry. I'm just so passionate because I'm tired of seeing people hurt. I'm tired of seeing teenagers grow into adulthood with regrets. I am so tired of that. I'm not against cell phones. I'm against people getting hurt with them. I'm not against the internet. I'm tired of people getting hurt with it. You decide to change, but we don't change the people we spend with, our time with. We don't change the music we listen to. We don't change the shows we watch. We don't unfollow any pages, accounts. Are you serious about this or not? Because it doesn't seem like it. If you're serious about getting victory and keeping the victory, there's going to be some changes. Maybe you have to set up a restriction. I don't know. If you have proven that you don't have the strength to resist, maybe you're going to need some oversight. Maybe you're going to need to remove it from your life. Why is it worth keeping around? If you can't control what you do, say, or look at on the internet or your phone, maybe if you're a young person, you need to have a parent. Maybe if you're older, you need to have a spouse or somebody put some restrictions on it. You know what? There's free ones out there. But honestly, well, yeah, I don't know, there's paid ones as well. Well, I don't want to pay for that. Let's be honest, how many streaming services do we pay for? Our bank account always shows where our priorities are at, every time. I can't pay my school bill for the child to go to the Christian school or the activities or camp. You enjoying that NFL Sunday package, sir? Oh, yes, definitely. You know. The new big screen TV. Don't make it easy to get into sin. Don't make it available to get into sin. Don't hang around the people who have that habit. Don't listen to the music. Don't watch the shows that glorify, romanticize, or glamorize that habit. Because you're going to find a lot of that out there. You're going to have to get real honest with God. You are going to have to overwhelm your life with His influence. Whether it's Christian, godly music, whether it's time in your Bible, whether it's making sure you're faithful to church, whether it's cutting out the YouTube or Netflix or wherever it is that you keep getting hindered on, whatever it is, you're going to have to cut it out because you want that victory. No one changes unless they want it. You can rarely force someone to change. They don't want it, they'll fight you all the way through, and first chance they'll go back. You cannot change unless you want it. Look, a siege can take a while. For most, it'll be keeping your guard up until you have the strength to resist. The enemy, the devil, is real, and every promise he makes you is a lie. He has no desire but to see you fail and to break you. Sin cannot be controlled, it can't be compromised. You have to decide to cut yourself off from the devil's influence. You have to decide to give God the chance to strengthen you. And you have to decide to keep that guard up.